All right, let's jump right in. We're going to go back to 1971 when the US government put out this foundational report that basically declared a war on water pollution. And everything we're about to look at comes straight from that historic document, which laid out a totally revolutionary new way of thinking about how to protect the environment.
I mean, what a way to open a government report, right? This incredible metaphor is right there in the foreword. It just perfectly captures the feeling of the time. A nation was finally waking up, and the government was ready to harness all that energy. This was way more than just another policy paper. It was a genuine call to arms.
So, what was it that actually lit that fire? What was the crisis that pushed America to the edge and forced such a massive, dramatic response?
Well, to put it simply, the country's water was a complete and utter disaster. The 1971 report paints this really grim picture of an environmental crisis that was touching pretty much every single corner of the nation.
And what's so wild is how real and in your face these problems were. This wasn't some abstract concept. You had acid from old mines in Appalachia that was literally killing entire streams. You had raw sewage being dumped that forced shellfish beds to close. Oil spills weren't some rare catastrophe. They were happening almost every single day in America's harbors. And the list just keeps going. Cyanide spills causing massive fish kills, hot water from power plants threatening salmon out in the Pacific Northwest. The problem was just everywhere.
And here is a statistic that just absolutely stops you in your tracks. The report found that sediment pollution, we're talking about dirt and soil washing away from farms and construction sites, was at least 700 times greater than all the pollution coming from sewage combined. 700 times. It just shows you there was this massive, almost hidden part of the problem that wasn't even coming out of a factory pipe.
So, because the problem was so huge, the government knew this wasn't just a simple cleanup job. They actually framed it as a fundamental change in the American way of life. They called it a new American revolution that had to rebalance our technology with nature. And to lead this revolution, a brand new federal agency was created by a presidential order, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. It was the first time a single agency was given the power to research, to regulate, and to enforce the country's environmental laws. You could think of it as the command center for this new war on pollution. But the EPA wasn't expected to fight this war all by itself. No, the government dug up this fascinating and frankly unlikely weapon from America's legal past, a tool that would empower everyday people to join the fight themselves. So you gotta ask, right? How in the world does a law that was written when people were still riding horse-drawn carriages help take on modern 20th century industrial pollution? Well, the answer is surprisingly simple and pretty brilliant. They rediscovered this thing called the Refuse Act of 1899. It was this really straightforward law that had basically been sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Its real power was in how simple it was. It banned dumping any kind of refuse into the nation's waters without a permit, not just toxic waste. Any refuse. And here is the genius move. The law had a kicker. If a company got caught and fined for polluting, the citizen who reported them, the informer, was legally entitled to half of that fine. All of a sudden, there was a real financial reason for people to become environmental watchdogs. This kind of legal mechanism actually has a name. It's called a Qui Tam action. It's an old idea where a regular person can sue on behalf of the government. So this meant people weren't just calling in tips about pollution. They were actually given the legal power to start lawsuits themselves. It turned the entire population into potential enforcers. Now, empowering citizens was a huge part of the strategy, but it was just one front in this war. The EPA also put together a really comprehensive battle plan to go after the biggest sources of pollution head-on. First, they had to identify the main culprits. And what they found was pretty incredible. A whopping 85% of all industrial wastewater came from just 4 industries: metals, chemicals, paper, and petroleum and coal. Knowing that let them focus their resources where they would make the biggest difference. And from there, they could develop these really specific strategies for specific problems. So to fight all that sediment pollution, they focused on erosion control. For oil spills, they created a national contingency plan with these dedicated strike forces ready to respond. To handle acid draining from old mines, they started projects to seal them up. And for the growing problem of waste from huge animal feedlots, they pushed for totally new ways to handle and treat it. It was a really smart, targeted attack on all fronts.
But, laws and strategies can only get you so far if you want to fuel a revolution. The government knew it also had to win the hearts and minds of the American people. So they launched this public information campaign that was honestly just remarkably creative. This quote says it all. This is the agency's commissioner talking to his own PR team. He's not asking for boring government flyers. He's telling them to be innovators, to be a non-bureaucratic force, and to challenge the way things are done, even if it gives him and the agency new headaches. I mean, what a mandate. And boy, did they deliver. We're talking TV ads so good that Variety magazine said they would make Madison Avenue shiver. They made radio spots with New Orleans jazz bands singing about clean water. They set up a national youth council called Scope just to get ideas directly from students. They backed environmental teach-ins in thousands of high schools. They even made a film narrated by Lorne Greene, the dad from the TV show Bonanza. This was a full-scale multimedia cultural campaign. So you might be wondering, did it actually work? Well, the proof is in the numbers. In just 1 year, the number of calls from the public to the Clean Water headquarters every week more than doubled, jumping from 250 to over 600. The American public was plugged in, they were fired up, and they were ready to get involved. When you look back at it, the plan they laid out in 1971 was just unbelievably ambitious. It dusted off old laws, it created powerful new agencies, and it mobilized the public in a way that had never really been done before. It truly was a revolution. And that leaves us with one last really big question. Now, over half a century later, when you look at the state of our rivers and our lakes and our oceans today, was it enough? Is that war they started finally won?